A homeless man gives away his last dollar to someone in need, expecting nothing in return. Weeks later, his selfless act sets off a life-changing chain of events that turns him into a millionaire. What he did next with his newfound wealth will leave you speechless. In the heart of a busy city where towering buildings cast long shadows over the sidewalks, lived a man named Charlie. He wasn't like everyone else hustling through the streets, dressed in business suits and holding coffee cups. Instead, Charlie sat on the edge of the sidewalk, his belongings packed into a worn-out backpack beside him. His face, weathered by years of hardship, carried a quiet resolve, but there was a kindness in his eyes that not even the harshest days could erase. Life hadn't always been this way for Charlie. There was a time when he had a job, an apartment, and a sense of stability. But like many, circumstances had shifted quickly, and he found himself without a roof over his head, wondering where his next meal would come from. Despite his situation, Charlie had one thing left: his belief in doing the right thing, no matter how small. He held on to the idea that even if the world had turned its back on him, he didn't have to turn his back on the world. On this particular day, Charlie's stomach rumbled, a constant reminder that he hadn't eaten anything since the night before. The few coins in his pocket weren't enough to buy much more than a snack, and he knew he would need to be careful with the little money he had left. As he walked along the sidewalk, scanning the street for a way to make it through the day, something caught his eye. A man, not much older than himself, stood a few feet away. He wore torn clothes, and his hands shook as he held a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Anything helps." Charlie recognized the look in the man's eyes, the same mix of hunger and desperation he had seen in the mirror, more times than he cared to admit. For a moment, Charlie hesitated. He reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled dollar bill, the only money he had left. The decision was not an easy one. That dollar could buy him a sandwich, enough to ease the gnawing hunger that had become all too familiar. But looking at the man before him, Charlie saw someone in need, someone who might need that dollar even more than he did. With a deep breath and a quiet conviction, Charlie stepped forward and pressed the dollar into the man's hand. "Here," Charlie said, his voice soft but steady. "It's not much, but maybe it'll help." The man looked up, startled at first, but then a slow, grateful smile spread across his face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Charlie nodded, giving a small smile in return before turning to walk away. His stomach still rumbled, but as he moved down the street, a strange sense of peace washed over him. He had nothing left, yet somehow it felt like he had everything. What Charlie didn't know in that moment was how much that simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The city bustled around Charlie as he walked away from the man holding the cardboard sign, now with no money left to his name. His steps were slower, his stomach still empty, but his mind felt lighter. He had given all he had, and somehow that made the weight on his shoulders feel a little less heavy. Charlie's thoughts wandered as he made his way toward the part of town where the shelters were, hoping he could find a place to sleep for the night. With no money left, he would need to rely on the kindness of strangers and the small miracles that sometimes showed up in his life. He had learned to get by on very little. Sometimes it was a free meal from a local soup kitchen. Other times it was simply a bench in the park where he could rest his head. Survival was a series of small wins and losses, but today, something felt different. As he turned the corner near the shelter, a man in a tailored suit brushed past him, speaking hurriedly into his phone. The man didn't look at Charlie, but something about him stuck in Charlie's mind. It wasn't the man himself, but the contrast. The world felt so far apart. People in suits were moving fast, with places to go and lives to live, while people like Charlie just floated through the cracks, unnoticed, unseen. But just as Charlie was about to reach the door of the shelter, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw the same man in the suit walking toward him. His phone was no longer glued to his ear, and his eyes were fixed on Charlie. There was something different about his gaze, like he wasn't just looking at a homeless man, but seeing him for the first time. "Hey!" the man called out, quickening his pace as he approached. Charlie tensed, unsure what to expect. Usually when people stopped to talk to him, it wasn't out of kindness. The man came closer, his face filled with a strange mixture of curiosity and concern. "I saw what you did back there," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You gave that man your last dollar, didn't you?" Charlie blinked in surprise. He hadn't realized anyone had been watching. The act hadn't been for show. He just did what felt right in the moment. Unsure how to respond, Charlie nodded slowly. The man studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand the reason behind Charlie's action. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. His question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. Charlie shrugged, glancing down at the ground before looking back at the man. He looked like he needed it more than I did. The man's expression softened slightly. He nodded as if weighing Charlie's words. "I'm not sure I would have done the same in your position," the man admitted. "But that was something." Charlie wasn't sure where this conversation was going, and part of him wanted to leave, but there was something about the man's tone that kept him rooted in place. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Look," he said, handing the card to Charlie. "I'm in town for a few days on business. I run a small company, and we're looking for someone who can help with some odd jobs around the office. Nothing glamorous, but it's a paying gig. You interested?" Charlie stared at the card in disbelief, barely processing what was happening. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice thick with doubt. The man smiled, though it was a small, almost cautious smile. "Yeah, serious. Come by tomorrow morning and we'll see if we can get you started." Charlie took the card, holding it carefully in his hand like it was a lifeline. He glanced down at the address printed on it, not quite believing this sudden twist of fate. After weeks, even months, of struggling just to get by, an opportunity had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The man nodded once more before turning to leave, pulling out his phone as he disappeared back into the flow of busy pedestrians. Charlie stood there for a moment, staring at the business card, his mind racing. This was more than he had hoped for. A chance, a real chance to do something. The card felt heavy in his hand, like it carried the weight of his future. Tomorrow. Everything could change tomorrow. That night, Charlie barely slept. He had found a corner at the shelter where he could lay down, but his mind was too busy with thoughts of what the next day might bring. The business card, now folded neatly in his pocket, felt like a strange ticket to another life, a life where things might be different. It was a sliver of hope, something he hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. Morning arrived with the faint light of dawn filtering through the shelter's small windows. Charlie got up before most of the others, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. He didn't have much to prepare. There were no clean clothes to change into, no way to wash off the grime of the streets. But he did the best he could, running his fingers through his messy hair and brushing the dirt from his worn jacket. He left the shelter before breakfast was served. His stomach growled, but the promise of something better pushed him forward. As he made his way through the city streets, Charlie held the business card tightly in his hand, occasionally glancing down at the address written on it. The buildings he passed were familiar, but today, everything felt different. Today, there was something more than just survival on his mind. The address led him to a small office building nestled between two larger, towering structures. It wasn't flashy, just a modest brick building with clean windows and a sign above the door that read, Harrison Enterprises. Charlie hesitated at the entrance, nerves starting to creep in. He wasn't sure what to expect. Was this real? Was it even possible that a stranger would offer him a job just like that? Taking a deep breath, Charlie pushed open the door. Inside, the office was small but neat. A receptionist sat behind a desk, typing away on her computer. She looked up as Charlie entered, her expression neutral but polite. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flickering briefly over his disheveled appearance. Charlie cleared his throat, feeling the weight of her gaze. Yeah. I was told to come here for a job," he said, pulling out the business card and showing it to her. She glanced at the card and nodded. "You must be here to see Mr. Harrison. Wait here a moment." The receptionist picked up the phone and dialed quickly, speaking in a low voice before hanging up. A minute later, the man from the street, the one who had given Charlie the card, appeared in the doorway. Today, he looked just as polished as he had the day before, his suit crisp and his shoes shining. But there was a warmth in his eyes as he spotted Charlie. "Charlie, right?" he said, extending his hand for a shake. Charlie nodded, shaking his hand. "Yeah, thanks for this. For giving me a chance." Mr. Harrison gave a small smile. "Come on back. Let's talk about what we need." Charlie followed him into a small office where they sat down at a table. The walls were lined with bookshelves and framed photos, but Charlie barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the man sitting across from him, waiting to see what kind of opportunity was being offered. "We've got some work around here," Mr. Harrison began, leaning back in his chair. "Nothing too complicated. Mostly cleaning up the place, running errands, helping out wherever you're needed. It's not much, but it's a paycheck. And if you show you can handle it, there might be more down the line." Charlie's chest tightened, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. "I can do that," he said quickly. "I can do whatever you need." Mr. Harrison nodded. "Good. We'll start you off part-time. Here's the deal. It's minimum wage for now, but you'll get paid weekly. Think you can start today?" Charlie felt like his head was spinning. This was real. This was happening. "Yeah, I can start right now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "All right," Mr. Harrison said, standing up and handing Charlie a sheet of paper with some basic details. "Welcome aboard, Charlie. Let's get you started." Charlie followed him out of the office, the reality of his situation still sinking in. For the first time in what felt like forever, he had a job. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was everything when you had nothing. As he started his first task, cleaning up the office kitchen, Charlie couldn't help but think back to the man with the cardboard sign. That single dollar he had given away now felt like the start of something much bigger than he could have imagined. The days that followed were unlike anything Charlie had experienced in a long time. Each morning he arrived early at the small office, grateful for the chance to do even the simplest of tasks. He swept floors, organized files, and ran errands all over the city. For Charlie, it didn't matter that the work was humble. What mattered was that he had work. Every hour spent in the office felt like a small step back toward the life he thought he had lost forever. Though the job was physically tiring, it filled Charlie with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The routine of showing up each day gave him something to hold on to, something that helped him rebuild the fragments of his self-worth. The people in the office were friendly, even if they didn't know his full story, and Mr. Harrison checked in on him regularly, offering small words of encouragement that went a long way. 1 week passed, then 2, and soon Charlie received his first paycheck. It wasn't much, just enough to get him a few meals and a clean shirt, but to Charlie it was a lifeline. He could feel himself slowly pulling out of the deep hole that had swallowed him for so long. The nights spent at the shelter no longer felt as hopeless, and he found himself thinking less about how to survive the next day, and more about what might be possible for his future. One evening, as Charlie sat on a park bench during his lunch break, he found himself lost in thought. The park had become a bit of a refuge for him, a place where he could sit quietly and think without the constant noise of the city bearing down on him. As he ate a simple sandwich, Charlie reflected on how far he had come since that day he had given away his last dollar. It was strange to think that such a small act could have triggered this new chapter in his life. He was deep in thought when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Charlie, right?" Charlie turned around to see Mr. Harrison walking toward him, a warm smile on his face. It was unusual for Mr. Harrison to come to the park, and Charlie wondered what brought him there. "Hey, Mr. Harrison," Charlie greeted him, setting his sandwich aside. "Didn't expect to see you here." Mr. Harrison sat down on the bench beside him. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. I've been meaning to talk to you, actually." Charlie's heart began to race. He wasn't sure if this was good news or bad, but he braced himself, hoping it wasn't the latter. "You've been doing good work," Mr. Harrison began, his tone reassuring. "You show up on time, you get things done, and I've noticed the extra effort you've been putting in." Charlie nodded, his stomach tightening with anticipation. He wasn't used to praise, but he could tell something more was coming. "I have a proposition for you," Mr. Harrison continued. "It's more responsibility than what you've been doing, but I think you're ready for it. We've got a new project coming up, and I could use someone reliable to help manage the logistics. It's still a lot of grunt work, but it pays better, and if you do well, there's room for growth." Charlie blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. A promotion? More responsibility? It was more than he had dared to hope for. I don't know what to say," Charlie stammered, feeling a wave of emotion surge through him. "Say yes," Mr. Harrison said with a grin. "We'll take it one step at a time, and if it's too much, you let me know. But I think you're ready for this." Charlie swallowed hard, the gravity of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was the start of something more, something that could change his life for good. "Yes," Charlie said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "I'll do it. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Mr. Harrison replied, standing up. "Come by the office tomorrow. We'll get you started." As Mr. Harrison walked away, Charlie sat on the bench, the weight of his decision pressing on him in the best possible way. It was another step forward, another door opening in a life that, just weeks ago, had seemed completely shut. Charlie finished his sandwich, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in a long time, he didn't just feel like he was surviving, he felt like he was living. The next morning, Charlie arrived at the office earlier than usual, his heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves. Mr. Harrison had offered him an opportunity, something more than the cleaning, filing, and errands he'd been doing for weeks. It wasn't just about the paycheck anymore. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more. It had been a long time since anyone had trusted him with real responsibility, and the weight of that trust felt both thrilling and intimidating. As the days passed, Charlie dove headfirst into his new role. Mr. Harrison gradually introduced him to more significant aspects of the company's operations, and Charlie found himself learning at an incredible pace. He was no longer just handling the logistics project. Now he was involved in meetings, making decisions, and managing a small team. Each task stretched him further, but he embraced the challenge with the same tenacity that had carried him through his hardest times on the streets. His life outside of work started to shift too. With his steady paycheck, Charlie was finally able to move out of the shelter. He found a modest studio apartment, small, but it was his. It had been years since he had a place to call his own. And standing in the empty room on his first night there, Charlie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it was his space, and that was something he hadn't had in far too long. Despite his progress, Charlie never forgot what had brought him to this point. Every now and then, when he had a quiet moment at work or in his new apartment, his thoughts would return to that day with the man holding the cardboard sign. The act of giving away his last dollar had felt like a leap of faith, and somehow, that small gesture had sparked a series of events that led him to where he was now. But Charlie wasn't content just to reflect on the past. He felt a growing need to do something more, to give back in a way that reflected the kindness that had helped him along his journey. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He wanted to help people who were in the same position he had once been. One afternoon, during a break between meetings, Charlie found himself sitting across from Mr. Harrison in the office's small conference room. They were reviewing the latest updates on the logistics project, when Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair and glanced at Charlie. "You've been quiet lately," Mr. Harrison remarked with a smile. "Everything okay?" Charlie hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yeah, everything's fine. It's just, I've been thinking a lot lately, about where I've been, where I'm going, and what I can do to help people who are still where I was. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Charlie took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I've been given this incredible chance, he said slowly. But I know there are a lot of people out there who aren't as lucky. People like me who ended up on the streets and just need a little help to get back on their feet. I want to do something for them, something that gives back in the way I've been given to. Mr. Harrison smiled, clearly impressed. That's a fantastic idea, Charlie. You've been through it, so you know what people need. I'm behind you on this. We can definitely explore how to make this happen. Charlie felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. It wasn't just about what he could achieve for himself anymore. It was about lifting others up, just as he had been lifted. He knew there was more work ahead, but this was the kind of work that mattered most to him. They spent the next hour talking through potential ideas, sketching out rough plans for what a partnership with local shelters might look like. Mr. Harrison offered to connect Charlie with other business owners who might be interested in supporting the initiative, and together they brainstormed ways to provide meaningful employment opportunities for people facing homelessness. By the time the conversation wrapped up, Charlie felt a sense of purpose that ran even deeper than before. His life had changed dramatically, and now he was on the verge of changing other lives too. He had always believed in the power of kindness, and now he had the chance to turn that belief into something real, something that could transform not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. As Charlie left the office that day, he knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. He had already climbed out of the deepest hole, and now he was determined to bring others with him. The weeks that followed were filled with planning, networking, and quiet determination. Charlie found himself immersed in the process of turning his idea into reality. The more he thought about it, the more passionate he became. This was more than just a project. It was a chance to create something that could have a lasting impact on people's lives. With Mr. Harrison's help, Charlie reached out to local shelters and community organizations. Some were skeptical at first, unsure if a business partnership would truly benefit the homeless population. But as Charlie shared his own story, how one small opportunity had completely changed the course of his life, people began to listen. His sincerity and lived experience made him relatable, and it didn't take long for others to recognize that he was serious about making a difference. One afternoon, Charlie sat in the same park where he used to eat his meals alone. Except this time, he wasn't alone. Across from him sat Ms. Davis, the director of a local homeless shelter that provided services to hundreds of individuals every year. She had agreed to meet with Charlie after hearing about his proposal, but as she looked at him, it was clear that she wasn't entirely convinced. "So, let me get this straight," Ms. Davis said, her tone both curious and cautious. "You want to set up a job program through your company to help people who are homeless, and you're going to hire them directly?" Charlie nodded, his expression earnest. "That's right. I want to offer people jobs, not charity, but actual work. I know from personal experience that what people need most isn't a handout. It's a chance to rebuild their lives. When I was on the streets, that's what I needed. Someone to believe in me enough to give me a job." Ms. Davis studied him for a long moment. She had heard plenty of pitches in her time, and most didn't amount to much. But something about Charlie's story resonated with her. She had seen too many people struggle to get back on their feet because no one was willing to take a chance on them. If this was real, it could be life-changing for the people she worked with. "I've seen a lot of people come through our doors," she said slowly, "and many of them just need that first step. But what happens if they don't succeed? What if they can't handle the job? What if they fall back into their old habits?" Charlie took a deep breath. He had asked himself these same questions many times. "I know it won't work for everyone," he admitted. "Some people might struggle and some might not make it, but I believe we owe it to them to give them the chance. And for those who do succeed, it could change everything. Like it did for me." Ms. Davis leaned back on the bench, her expression thoughtful. "You know, you're right. We have to take risks if we want to make a difference. And I've seen too many people get passed over because of their circumstances, not their potential. I'm willing to give this a shot." Charlie's heart swelled with relief. He had been prepared for her to say no, but now that she had agreed, it felt like the first real step toward making this program a reality. "Thank you," Charlie said, his voice full of gratitude. "You won't regret it, I promise." Ms. Davis gave a small smile. "We'll see. I'll send over a few names from our program, people who are ready to work and just need an opportunity. Let's see how it goes." As they wrapped up their meeting, Charlie felt a wave of excitement and nervousness wash over him. This was it, the beginning of something bigger than himself. The shelter would send a few people, and if it worked out, they could expand the program further. But for now, Charlie focused on the first step, giving someone the same chance that Mr. Harrison had given him. The next few days flew by as Charlie prepared for the new hires. He worked closely with Mr. Harrison, who had been fully supportive of the initiative from the start. A few days later, the news crew arrived at the office to film the segment. The atmosphere was electric, with employees buzzing about the upcoming feature. The team set up cameras and lights, and before long, Charlie found himself in front of the camera, being interviewed about the origins of the program and his journey from homelessness to running a business. The reporter, a woman with bright eyes and an easy smile, asked the questions with genuine interest. "So, Charlie," she began, "you've managed to turn your life around in a big way. Can you tell us a little about what motivated you to start this initiative?" Charlie shifted in his chair, trying to find the right words. "I guess it all started when I hit rock bottom," he said honestly. "I was homeless, living on the streets with nothing to my name. One day, I gave away my last dollar to someone who looked like they needed it more than I did. At the time, I didn't know it, but that small act of kindness set off a chain of events that changed my life." The reporter nodded, clearly moved by his words. "And now, you're giving others that same opportunity." "That's right," Charlie continued. "I know what it's like to feel like you have nothing and no one to turn to. But I also know how powerful it can be when someone gives you a chance, when they believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. That's what this program is all about. It's not just about giving people jobs. It's about giving them hope and a future." As the interview went on, the camera crew filmed some of the employees who had come through the program. Sarah, the woman who had shown Charlie her improvement proposal a few weeks earlier, spoke candidly about how the job had given her back her confidence. Another man, Mark, shared how he had struggled with addiction for years and how working at the company had helped him stay on a steady path toward recovery. The stories were raw and powerful, and by the time the interview wrapped up, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the news crew, who had probably covered countless human interest stories, seemed deeply touched by what they had witnessed. A few days later, the news segment aired. Charlie watched it quietly from his small apartment, sitting on his worn but comfortable couch. As the reporter introduced the story, the screen filled with images of the office, the employees, and finally Charlie himself, sharing his story with the world. It was surreal seeing his life laid out like that, but more than that, it was a reminder of just how far he had come. The response was immediate. The company's phone rang non-stop the following day, with people calling to donate, offer support, or inquire about job opportunities. Local businesses reached out, wanting to partner with the initiative, and several shelters expressed interest in joining forces. It seemed that the story had struck a chord with viewers, many of whom had no idea that something like this was happening in their own city. Later that evening, Mr. Harrison called Charlie to congratulate him. "You handled that interview like a pro," he said with a chuckle. "I think we're going to have our hands full with all the interest this is generating." Charlie smiled, grateful but humbled by the attention. "I just told the truth," he replied. "It's amazing how people respond when they see what kindness can really do." As he hung up the phone, Charlie looked around his apartment. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it was his, a place where he had rebuilt his life from the ground up. And now, with the program expanding and the community rallying behind it, He knew that the impact would stretch far beyond anything he could have imagined. Charlie sat back, reflecting on the journey. From a crumpled dollar to a thriving program that was changing lives, he realized that it wasn't about the money at all. It had never been about that. It was about hope. It was about seeing the value in people, even when they were at their lowest, and that was something you couldn't put a price on. Months passed, and the success of Charlie's program continued to grow, and with it, his reputation as a business leader who cared deeply about the community. People who had once passed him by on the streets now saw him as an inspiration, a testament to what a little faith and opportunity could do for someone. The media attention didn't stop at the local news. Soon, larger outlets started to take interest, and Charlie found himself juggling interviews and invitations to speak at various community events. But as much as he appreciated the recognition, Charlie never lost sight of his original mission. His focus remained on the people coming through the doors of Harrison Enterprises, the ones who needed a chance just like he once did. He made it a point to stay connected with the employees who had come through the program, mentoring them and offering support whenever they needed it. They created a basic training program to help ease the new employees into their roles, making sure that they had the resources they needed to succeed. And then, the first day arrived. Charlie stood at the entrance of Harrison Enterprises, waiting anxiously for the new hires to arrive. It was a strange feeling, being on the other side of things. Not long ago, he had been the one stepping through these doors for the first time, unsure of what the future held. Now he was the one offering that same uncertainty, but also hope, to someone else. 3 people walked through the door that morning. Each of them had their own story, their own struggles. They were nervous, unsure of what to expect, but Charlie greeted them warmly, remembering how much a friendly face had meant to him when he had first started. "Welcome," he said, shaking their hands one by one. "We're glad to have you here. Today's the first step, and we're going to help you every way we can." The day went by quickly as Charlie showed the new hires around, explained their tasks, and introduced them to the rest of the team. There were a few bumps, as expected, but nothing that couldn't be smoothed out with time. At the end of the day, Charlie watched as the new employees left the office, a mix of relief and pride in their eyes. He knew it was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments where things didn't go as planned. But Charlie also knew that this was the work that mattered most. He had been given a chance when he thought all hope was lost, and now he had the power to give that same chance to others. As he locked up the office that evening, Charlie couldn't help but think about how far he had come. From a man with nothing to someone who was changing lives, one person at a time. The next few weeks were filled with a kind of quiet triumph. The program had started small, but the impact was undeniable. The 3 people Charlie had hired were settling into their roles, gaining confidence with each passing day. There were rough patches, of course, moments where mistakes were made or where doubts crept in. But Charlie had expected that. He knew firsthand that change didn't happen overnight. It was a process, and one that required patience and understanding. Charlie made it a point to check in with each of them regularly, offering support and guidance whenever he could. He had learned from Mr. Harrison's approach, firm but compassionate, and it was working. The new hires weren't just employees. They were people who had once been in the same position Charlie had been in, and he treated them with the respect and dignity they deserved. One afternoon, Charlie was in his office, going over some logistics reports when there was a knock on the door. He looked up to see Sarah, one of the 3 new hires, standing hesitantly in the doorway. She was clutching a piece of paper in her hand, her expression a mix of anxiety and hope. "Hey, Sarah," Charlie said, gesturing for her to come in. "What's going on?" Sarah stepped inside, still holding the paper tightly. I wanted to talk to you about something," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "It's about the job and everything." Charlie set the reports aside, giving her his full attention. He could tell this was important to her, and he wanted to make sure she felt heard. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice growing steadier. "I know I've made some mistakes since I started, but you've been patient with me, and that means a lot. I'm still getting used to all of this, but I feel like I'm starting to find my way again." Charlie felt a warmth spread through him as he listened. He had watched Sarah struggle in the beginning, unsure of herself, making small errors that came from a lack of experience. But she had kept going, and now he could see the confidence slowly building in her. "You're doing great, Sarah," Charlie said with a smile. "Everyone makes mistakes when they start something new. The important thing is that you're learning, and I can see how much effort you're putting in." Sarah nodded, her grip on the paper loosening slightly. "I've been working on something," she said, holding out the paper toward him. "It's an idea I had for improving the way we handle some of the shipments. I wasn't sure if it was good, but I figured I'd show it to you." Charlie took the paper from her and scanned the document. It was a simple proposal, but as he read through it, he realized it had real potential. Sarah had clearly put thought into how the process could be more efficient, and it was a sign that she was not only becoming more comfortable in her role, but also thinking proactively about how to improve the business. "This is great, Sarah," Charlie said, looking up at her with genuine appreciation. "This could actually streamline a lot of what we're doing. I'm impressed." Her eyes widened in surprise, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "Really? You think it's a good idea?" "I do," Charlie replied. "We'll take a look at how we can implement some of these changes. It's clear you've put a lot of thought into this." For a moment, Sarah stood there looking a little stunned. Then, with a shy smile, she nodded. "Thanks, Charlie. I didn't think I'd be able to contribute like this, but you've given me a chance, and I really appreciate it." Charlie felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he watched Sarah leave the office, her shoulders a little straighter, her steps a little more confident. It wasn't just about her contribution to the job. It was about seeing someone rediscover their worth, their potential. This was what he had envisioned when he started the program. He wanted people to see that they were capable of more than they thought, that they could rebuild their lives just as he had. As the days went by, Charlie noticed similar progress with the other new hires. They were growing, learning, and finding their place within the company. Word of the program began to spread, and soon other business owners in the area started reaching out to Charlie, curious about how they could get involved. Mr. Harrison had kept his promise and connected Charlie with key people in the community, and now the initiative was beginning to expand beyond what Charlie had initially imagined. One evening, after a long day at the office, Charlie found himself walking through the park where it had all begun. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the trees and the benches, and as Charlie looked around, memories flooded back. He could still picture himself sitting on one of those benches, hungry, tired, and lost, with nothing but a crumpled dollar in his pocket. It felt like a lifetime ago. As he walked, Charlie spotted a familiar figure, a man standing near the entrance to the park, holding a cardboard sign. The man's clothes were worn, his face etched with the kind of exhaustion that Charlie knew all too well. For a moment, Charlie stood still, watching the man. It was like seeing a reflection of his former self, and it reminded him just how close he had come to staying in that place forever. Without hesitating, Charlie approached the man. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed the man a small stack of bills, more than enough for a meal and a place to stay for the night. "Here," Charlie said softly. "I hope this helps." The man looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching the money as though it were a lifeline. Charlie nodded and walked away, his heart full. He didn't stop to explain who he was or how he understood the man's situation. He didn't need to. Charlie knew that sometimes all it took was one small act of kindness to change everything. As the program continued to grow, Charlie found himself busier than ever. His days were filled with meetings, managing the logistics of the company, and overseeing the new hires who were steadily coming in from local shelters. The initiative had taken off faster than he had anticipated, And what began as a small partnership with one shelter had expanded into multiple collaborations with different organizations across the city. Business owners and community leaders were taking notice, and many wanted to get involved in supporting the program. Despite the growing demands on his time, Charlie never lost sight of why he had started all of this. He made sure to personally connect with each new hire, taking time to understand their stories and offering them the same level of support and encouragement he had once received from Mr. Harrison. The people who came through the program were from all walks of life. Some had lost jobs due to circumstances beyond their control. Others had battled addiction or faced mental health challenges. But each of them had the same hunger for a second chance, just like Charlie had. One afternoon, Charlie received an unexpected call from a local news station. They had heard about the job program and wanted to do a feature on it, showcasing how it was helping to transform lives. The reporter on the phone was enthusiastic, explaining how they wanted to highlight real stories of individuals who had benefited from the program and the impact it was having on the community. Charlie hesitated for a moment. He had never been the kind of person to seek the spotlight, and the idea of being on television made him uncomfortable. But then he thought about the people the program had helped, the ones who had regained their dignity and self-worth through honest work. If sharing their stories could inspire others to get involved or offer their own opportunities, it was worth it. "All right," Charlie agreed, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's do it." Some had moved on to other opportunities, taking with them the skills and confidence they had gained, while others had become integral members of the company, taking on more responsibility as they grew in their roles. One evening, after a long day of work, Charlie found himself thinking back to the early days of the program. It had started with just 3 people, but now dozens had passed through the initiative, and many more were on the way. The ripple effect was undeniable. People who had once felt forgotten were now finding stability, purpose, and hope. It was humbling, and it reminded Charlie that this wasn't just about jobs. It was about restoring dignity, rebuilding lives, and showing people that they mattered. As Charlie prepared to head home, there was a knock on his office door. He looked up to see Mark, one of the first hires from the program, standing in the doorway. Mark had come a long way since his first days at Harrison Enterprises. When he had started, he was fresh out of rehab, struggling to stay clean and unsure of his place in the world. But over time, with steady work and support, Mark had turned his life around. He was now one of the company's most reliable employees, handling important projects with confidence and skill. "Hey, Mark," Charlie said, smiling as he gestured for him to come in. "What's going on?" Mark stepped into the office, looking a little more serious than usual. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I just wanted to talk to you about something important," he began. Charlie leaned forward, sensing that this was more than a casual conversation. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Mark took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that's happened since I started working here. When I came to this program, I didn't think I'd make it. I didn't think I was worth saving, to be honest, but you and Mr. Harrison, you believed in me. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Charlie listened intently, remembering the nervous man who had first walked into the office months ago. Mark had been a hard case, wrestling with demons that had threatened to pull him under, but he had fought back, and now he was standing on the other side of that struggle, stronger than ever. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want to pay it forward," Mark continued, his voice growing more certain. "I want to help others the way you helped me. I've been talking to some of the guys at the shelter I used to stay at, and there are so many people who just need a break. I want to get involved with the program more, maybe help mentor some of the new hires, show them that they can turn things around, just like I did." Charlie felt a surge of pride as he listened to Mark's words. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he started the initiative, that the people who came through the program wouldn't just find stability, but that they would be inspired to help others in turn. Mark's journey had been difficult, but now he was ready to give back, to lift others up just as he had been lifted. "That's incredible, Mark," Charlie said, his voice full of warmth. I think you'd be an amazing mentor. You've lived through it, you've done the hard work, and you know better than anyone what it takes to rebuild your life. I'm proud of you." Mark smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thanks, Charlie. I wouldn't be here without you." Charlie shook his head. "You did the work, Mark. We just gave you the chance." They talked for a while longer, brainstorming ideas for how Mark could get more involved with the mentoring aspect of the program. By the time the conversation ended, it was clear that this was the next step in the evolution of the initiative, creating a space where people who had been through the program could come back and mentor new hires, offering guidance, support, and most importantly, hope. As Mark left the office, Charlie sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The program was no longer just about him, or even the people who had first come through its doors. It was about creating a community, a network of support that would continue to grow, helping more people than Charlie had ever imagined. That night, as Charlie walked through the city on his way home, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed. The streets he walked now were the same ones he had wandered as a homeless man, but everything was different. He was different. He had purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years. But most importantly, he had the knowledge that kindness, something as simple as giving away $1, could change lives. It had changed his, and now, through the program, it was changing countless others. As Charlie reached the door of his apartment building, he paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky. The stars were faint against the city's bright lights, but they were there, twinkling softly in the distance. And in that quiet moment, Charlie felt something close to peace. The journey wasn't over, there was still so much more to do. But Charlie knew, without a doubt, that he was on the right path, and that was more than enough. As the days rolled by, the success of Charlie's program continued to grow, and with it, his reputation as a business leader who cared deeply about the community. People who had once passed him by on the streets now saw him as an inspiration, a testament to what a little faith and opportunity could do for someone. The media attention didn't stop at the local news. Soon, larger outlets started to take interest, and Charlie found himself juggling interviews and invitations to speak at various community events. But as much as he appreciated the recognition, Charlie never lost sight of his original mission. His focus remained on the people coming through the doors of Harrison Enterprises, the ones who needed a chance just like he once did. He made it a point to stay connected with the employees who had come through the program, mentoring them and offering support whenever they needed it. Some had moved on to other opportunities, taking with them the skills and confidence they had gained, while others had become integral members of the company, taking on more responsibility as they grew in their roles. One evening, after a long day of work, Charlie found himself thinking back to the early days of the program. It had started with just 3 people, but now dozens had passed through the initiative, and many more were on the way. The ripple effect was undeniable. People who had once felt forgotten were now finding stability, purpose, and hope. It was humbling, and it reminded Charlie that this wasn't just about jobs. It was about restoring dignity, rebuilding lives, and showing people that they mattered. As Charlie prepared to head home, there was a knock on his office door. He looked up to see Mark, one of the first hires from the program, standing in the doorway. Mark had come a long way since his first days at Harrison Enterprises. When he had started, he was fresh out of rehab, struggling to stay clean and unsure of his place in the world. But over time, with steady work and support, Mark had turned his life around. He was now one of the company's most reliable employees, handling important projects with confidence and skill. "Hey, Mark," Charlie said, smiling as he gestured for him to come in. "What's going on?" Mark stepped into the office, looking a little more serious than usual. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I just wanted to talk to you about something important," he began. Charlie leaned forward, sensing that this was more than a casual conversation. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Mark took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that's happened since I started working here. When I came to this program, I didn't think I'd make it. I didn't think I was worth saving, to be honest. But you and Mr. Harrison, you believed in me. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Charlie listened intently, remembering the nervous man who had first walked into the office months ago. Mark had been a hard case, wrestling with demons that had threatened to pull him under. But he had fought back, and now he was standing on the other side of that struggle, stronger than ever. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want to pay it forward, Mark continued, his voice growing more certain. I want to help others the way you helped me. I've been talking to some of the guys at the shelter I used to stay at, and there are so many people who just need a break. I want to get involved with the program more, maybe help mentor some of the new hires, show them that they can turn things around, just like I did. Charlie felt a surge of pride as he listened to Mark's words. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he started the initiative, that the people who came through the program wouldn't just find stability, but that they would be inspired to help others in turn. Mark's journey had been difficult, but now he was ready to give back, to lift others up just as he had been lifted. That's incredible, Mark, Charlie said, his voice full of warmth. I think you'd be an amazing mentor. You've lived through it, you've done the hard work, and you know better than anyone what it takes to rebuild your life. I'm proud of you. Mark smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Thanks, Charlie. I wouldn't be here without you. Charlie shook his head. You did the work, Mark. We just gave you the chance. They talked for a while longer, brainstorming ideas for how Mark could get more involved with the mentoring aspect of the program. By the time the conversation ended, it was clear that this was the next step in the evolution of the initiative, creating a space where people who had been through the program could come back and mentor new hires, offering guidance, support, and most importantly, hope. As Mark left the office, Charlie sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The program was no longer just about him, or even the people who had first come through its doors. It was about creating a community, a network of support that would continue to grow, helping more people than Charlie had ever imagined. That night, as Charlie walked through the city on his way home, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed. The streets he walked now were the same ones he had wandered as a homeless man, but everything was different. He was different. He had purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years. But most importantly, he had the knowledge that kindness, something as simple as giving away $1, could change lives. It had changed his, and now, through the program, it was changing countless others. As Charlie reached the door of his apartment building, he paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky. The stars were faint against the city's bright lights, but they were there, twinkling softly in the distance. And in that quiet moment, Charlie felt something close to peace. The journey wasn't over. There was still so much more to do. But Charlie knew, without a doubt, that he was on the right path, and that was more than enough. The weeks that followed were filled with an air of quiet excitement, as the program Charlie had built was now attracting attention beyond his city. He was approached by local business leaders, community advocates, and even national organizations who had heard about the success of his initiative and wanted to know how they could get involved or replicate the model elsewhere. For Charlie, the idea that something he had started as a small gesture could ripple outward and touch so many lives was both humbling and inspiring. One afternoon, Charlie received an unexpected letter that would change everything. It was from a prominent philanthropist, Mr. Wallace, who had taken notice of the program and wanted to meet with Charlie to discuss how it might be expanded nationwide. The idea of taking his project across the country had never crossed Charlie's mind. But here it was, being offered to him on a much larger scale. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room in the city. As Charlie sat across from Mr. Wallace, he felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. Mr. Wallace wasted no time getting to the point. I've seen many initiatives aimed at helping the homeless, but yours stands out, Mr. Wallace began. It's personal and it's scalable. I think we could make this work in cities across the country, providing not just jobs but hope. What you've built is more than a program, it's a movement. Charlie listened intently, absorbing the weight of what was being proposed. Expanding nationwide? It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it made sense. The model had worked in his city. Why wouldn't it work elsewhere? "I'm in," Charlie said after a moment of thoughtful silence. "Let's make it happen." With that decision, the wheels were set in motion for a national rollout of the initiative. Over the next several months, Charlie found himself traveling across the country, helping to set up partnerships with shelters and businesses in different cities. The impact was immediate. The same transformations that had taken place in his hometown began to unfold in other places. People who had been written off by society were now getting second chances, finding work, and rebuilding their lives. At each launch event, Charlie met people who reminded him of himself. People who had been through the worst life had to offer, but were now standing on the edge of something new. He shared his story with them, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who understood what it meant to be in their shoes. The national expansion of Charlie's initiative took on a life of its own, with more cities joining the program each month. Everywhere Charlie went, he saw the same powerful change happening. People were finding hope where there had been none. The mentorship aspect of the program, which had started with Mark and a few other former employees, grew into a full-fledged network of support, with people who had gone through the program returning to guide others on the same path. One evening, Charlie found himself back in his apartment, reflecting on the whirlwind of the last few years. From a man who had given away his last dollar on the street corner, he was now at the head of a nationwide movement that was changing lives every day. It was surreal, but more than that, it was a testament to the power of kindness, of believing in people when no one else would. Charlie had never sought fame or recognition, but now his story had spread far and wide. People looked up to him as a symbol of what was possible, proof that a single act of compassion could ripple out into the world and create something extraordinary. And yet, through it all, Charlie remained humble. He knew that none of this would have been possible without the people who had believed in him along the way. Mr. Harrison, the employees who had trusted the process, the communities that had embraced the program. As he sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights, Charlie thought about the future. There was still so much work to do, so many more lives to touch. But now, he wasn't doing it alone. The program had become bigger than him, driven by the people it had helped and the communities that had embraced it. And that was what made it truly special. Charlie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey he had traveled. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people who had been part of this incredible story, from the man he had given his last dollar to the employees who had rebuilt their lives through the program, to the countless others who had been touched by the ripple effect of that one act of kindness. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The future stretched before him, full of possibility, full of hope. And Charlie knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, he was ready. Because in the end, it all came back to kindness, and the simple, powerful truth that one small gesture could change the world. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I work hard on these stories, and your support means a lot to me. Thank you for being part of this journey.